At 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, an HOA Karen made a $2.3 million mistake that would land her in federal prison for 8 years. And it all began with a pair of bolt cutters on the wrong military vehicle. Clang! The sharp bite of steel through my security chain shattered the suburban silence like gunfire. That metallic snap was the exact moment Bethany Kensington Wright went from HOA president to future federal felon, in 30 seconds flat. While I was deployed overseas fighting drug cartels, this self-appointed suburban dictator decided my so-called eyesore vehicle needed to disappear. What she didn't know was that the Jeep in my driveway belonged to a federal drug task force, packed with $347,000 worth of classified surveillance gear. And me. I wasn't just a soldier. I was the kind of federal agent whose specialty was dismantling criminal organizations. She thought she was removing a soldier's truck. In reality, she was committing federal crimes that would make cartel bosses envious. So let me ask, what would you do if some HOA tyrant messed with your property while you were serving your country? Drop a flag emoji and tell me where you're watching from. Let's see how many patriots are out there. My name is Marcus Tank Rodriguez, and 3 months ago, I thought inheriting my grandmother's house was a blessing. Boy, was I wrong. Willowbrook Estates, the very definition of picture-perfect suburban hell. Identical beige houses. Sprinklers hissing on their timed cycles. Fresh mulch trying, and failing, to cover the stench of entitlement. HOA dues, $150 a month. Translation: paying a power-hungry Karen to make your life miserable. I'm an Army Reserve MP, recently tapped for a federal drug task force. Grandma Rose's house was supposed to be my safety net. Rent it out during deployments. Build equity. Honor the woman who raised me after my parents' fatal car accident when I was 12. Even now, the place smells like her homemade tortillas and vanilla. Every creaky floorboard holds memories of her teaching me right from wrong. Mijo, she used to say, you stand up to bullies, but you do it the right way. Enter Bethany Kensington Wright. Picture a 52-year-old real estate agent with a white Lexus SUV, a ruler for measuring grass, and a god complex. 7 years as HOA president had turned her into a suburban tyrant. Her husband Carl sat on city council, which made her feel untouchable. This was a woman who issued violation notices for leaving Christmas lights up in January. 2 weeks into my deployment, an email hit my inbox, violation notice. Unauthorized commercial vehicle storage. My Jeep Wrangler, government issued, plastered with federal law enforcement decals, was apparently an eyesore. Bethany's interpretation of the rules? No work vehicles in residential driveways. Here's what she didn't know. That Jeep contained $200,000 worth of cartel investigation tech, encrypted radios, covert cameras, GPS trackers. Federal property. Untouchable without clearance. But to Bethany, it was just another notch on her HOA belt. Daily fines? $50. Accruing while I dodged bullets overseas. My sister Maya, a sweet middle school teacher, tried reasoning with her. She explained I was deployed, even showed copies of my orders, and offered to cover the Jeep with a top. Bethany sneered, rules are rules. If your brother can't follow simple standards, maybe this isn't the neighborhood for your family. That phone call from Maya still stings. Her voice cracked as she sat in Grandma's kitchen. Tank, she threatened to put a lien on the house. And she said Carl knows people at the school district, that if I fight back, it could affect my job. Maya also spotted a disturbing pattern. The Johnsons, he's a Marine, cited for a loud motorcycle. Sarah Martinez, a Navy wife, fined for unprofessional garden gnomes while her husband was deployed. Military families. Every single one targeted. The kicker. Bethany's violations were fake. Maya found the original bylaws in Grandma's paperwork from 1987. Government vehicles, military, emergency, law enforcement, were specifically exempt. Bethany was fabricating rules, banking on residents being too intimidated to check. And it worked. Neighbors whispered over fences, terrified of becoming her next target. With Carl's political connections, resistance seemed impossible. That's when I realized this wasn't about curb appeal. It was organized harassment of military families, shielded by a corrupt HOA and city politics. The memory of that call still puts sand in my teeth, the taste of diesel in my mouth, sweat in the desert heat. My grandmother's voice echoed, "Stand up to bullies, but do it the right way." So while I fought cartels overseas, a suburban tyrant tried to steal my family's legacy through intimidation and fraud. Bethany Kensington Wright had just declared war on the wrong man. She thought she was bullying a helpless family. What she didn't know was that I dismantle criminal organizations for a living, and her little HOA empire was about to be my next takedown. Her next move came 48 hours later, and it was pure suburban warfare. A registered letter arrived at Maya's house: remove the Jeep in 24 hours or face emergency towing. Not 48, not 72, 24. Federal property, at risk of being stolen, while I was deployed. The letter, carbon copied to Carl's City Council office and the local PD, cited health and safety violations and neighborhood degradation. Complete fiction, but dressed in legal jargon to intimidate. Maya called me, panic lacing her voice through the creak of Grandma's old kitchen floorboards. "Tank, there's a tow truck circling the block. The driver keeps staring at your Jeep." That was psychological warfare, suburban style. So I launched my counterpunch. I called JAG, the Judge Advocate General. Military lawyers who eat constitutional violations for breakfast. Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams reviewed my case file. Her professional expression hardened into fury. "Rodriguez, this isn't an HOA violation. This is a federal felony." Most people don't know this, but the Service Members Civil Relief Act doesn't just protect contracts, it specifically shields deployed service members' property. And more importantly, my Jeep wasn't even mine. It was federal law enforcement equipment. Williams filed a formal complaint with Base Command, triggering something beautiful: a federal military liaison review. Suddenly, Bethany's little HOA game had the attention of people who actually mattered. Then Maya found the real smoking gun. Buried in Grandma's HOA files from 2019 was a letter Bethany herself had written to the City Planning Commission. She opposed military housing programs, claiming transient military populations don't maintain community standards. Translation: she had been plotting to keep military families out of Willowbrook estates for years. The texture of old paper crumbled between Maya's fingers as she photographed the evidence. I'll never forget the sharp intake of her breath when she realized the scope of Bethany's discrimination. "Tank, she's been systematically targeting every military family here. The Hendersons, cited because their son's bike was left in the yard. The Washingtons, written up for excessive noise because their newborn cried at night. This wasn't random HOA nitpicking. This was organized discrimination, with political cover. Carl, Bethany's city council husband, had a development deal in motion. Luxury condos needing HOA approval for zoning variances. Military families, with their work vehicles, deployments, and unpredictable schedules, didn't fit the marketing image of an exclusive community. Maya's teacher instincts flared. She started contacting other targeted families, building a quiet network. Every bogus violation, every threatening letter, every intimidation tactic, she was unknowingly creating the foundation of a federal discrimination case. But Bethany escalated, crossing a line that would haunt her. Maya described it over the phone, the click of expensive heels on concrete as Bethany conducted her own inspection of Grandma's property. She snapped photos of my Jeep from every angle, tape measure in hand. "Your brother's military service doesn't excuse community non-compliance," she sneered. "Perhaps your family should consider whether this neighborhood is appropriate for your lifestyle." Code words. Thinly veiled, "We don't want your kind here." My counterpunch came fast. I remotely activated the Jeep's GPS tracker and onboard security system, standard issue for federal task force vehicles. The data was damning. 17 times in 3 days, Bethany trespassed, photographing classified law enforcement equipment. That wasn't just harassment. That was potential espionage. When my task force supervisor, Captain Sarah Chen, heard the report, her response was sharp and direct. "Rodriguez, how fast do you want me to make this woman's life complicated?" The federal government was about to introduce Bethany Kensington Wright to a reality check she never imagined. But Bethany struck again, desperation cloaked in suburban authority. 3 days after my JAG complaint, she hired ExecSafe Security to enforce community standards. A white SUV with security plastered on its sides patrolled the neighborhood, photographing my Jeep every hour like it was a bomb threat. That wasn't the real problem. The real problem was the lies they spread. Maya called me in tears over a crackling satellite line. "Tank, they're telling neighbors you're dangerous. That military vehicles bring security risks. Mrs. Patterson won't even look at me anymore." The sound of her sobs mixed with desert wind. Something cold settled in my chest. These people weren't just harassing me, they were destroying my family's reputation while I was powerless to defend them. My counter had to be surgical. But I was 8,000 miles away, with limited comms. During my next window, I called Captain Chen, explaining how private security was surveilling federal task force property. Her response surprised me. "Rodriguez, this is tricky. If we hit them too hard, we validate their claims that your vehicle is dangerous. We need them to hang themselves." The twist came when I tapped deeper into the Jeep's security system. Federal task force rigs carry more surveillance gear than most police stations. Motion sensors, infrared, GPS, autophotography within 15 feet. The footage nearly stopped my heart. At 1:43 a.m., Bethany was on my driveway, flashlight in hand, peering through the Jeep's windows, snapping photos of the dashboard, even tugging on the doors, trying to access classified surveillance equipment. But the worst part? She wasn't alone. The footage showed her pointing out components to ExecSafe's guards, who documented federal communications hardware with their own cameras. That crossed into dangerous territory. Meanwhile, the community was turning on Maya. Parents at her school whispered. The principal called her in about concerns raised by the PTA. Bethany had told them military families bring instability and security risks. During our next call, Maya's voice carried the chalk dust weariness of a teacher under fire. "Tank, she's using my job against me. They're trying to destroy my career." It hit me then. This wasn't about a Jeep anymore. They were dismantling my sister's life piece by piece, and I was stuck in a war zone, helpless. Helplessness tastes like sand and rage when you're in a communication bunker surrounded by the machinery of war, while a suburban tyrant terrorizes your family at home. And then it got worse. Bethany's hired security escalated. The lead guard, a failed cop with a badge complex, cornered Maya in a grocery store parking lot. Blocking her path to the car, he said, "We need to discuss your brother's military activities. That vehicle contains equipment that could pose risks to community safety. We need to know what kind of operations he might be running from that house." That's what the ExecSafe guard told my sister, looming over her in a grocery store lot. Maya, God bless her teacher instincts, hit record on her phone. "Are you suggesting my brother, who's serving overseas protecting this country, is a threat to American families?" she asked, voice steady though I could hear the tremor underneath. The guard stepped closer, weaponizing personal space. Military personnel sometimes bring home problems. PTSD. Weapons. Surveillance equipment. We're just ensuring community safety. They were painting me as an unstable veteran. Classic discrimination, dressed up as neighborhood safety. But Maya's recording caught something gold, the guard admitting they were investigating surveillance gear inside my Jeep. That single statement turned into evidence in a federal espionage case. My counterpunch hit Bethany from an angle she never saw coming. Captain Chen contacted the Federal Licensing Bureau overseeing private security, alerting them ExecSafe guards were conducting unauthorized surveillance of classified government property. By the next morning, the guards had vanished, but their company was now under federal investigation. Bethany panicked. She fired off emergency complaints to anyone with a phone line: police, fire, code enforcement, animal control. All she accomplished was creating a paper trail of her obsession with my Jeep. The war was escalating, and I was still 8,000 miles away while my family absorbed the hits. But Bethany had no idea she'd triggered protocols that would unleash the full weight of federal law enforcement on her little suburban empire. Her desperation finally boiled over at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and Maya's security cameras caught everything in perfect HD. Clang. 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 The sound of bolt cutters tearing through my security chain. Each snap echoed across the quiet street like gunfire. Maya's frantic call yanked me awake in a deployment tent. Tank. She's cutting your locks. She's got bolt cutters and a tow truck. She's stealing your Jeep right now. Through her phone, I watched Bethany Kensington Wright commit multiple federal felonies in real time. Hair disheveled, still in her bathrobe, she'd hired Discount Dave's towing with cash. No paperwork, no questions. She was directing them to load federal task force property onto their flatbed. The tow truck driver froze at the decals. Lady, this is government property. I'm not touching this for any amount of money. It's abandoned property. Bethany shrieked, spit flying. I'm HOA president. I have legal authority to remove violations. That statement, captured on 3 cameras, just became Exhibit A in a federal theft case. I hit back instantly. Through emergency channels, I alerted Captain Chen, triggering federal theft of property protocols. Within minutes, U.S. Marshals were racing toward my grandmother's address, lights and sirens blazing. Here's the kicker. My Jeep's hidden kill switch and trackers had already documented everything. Federal task force vehicles are wired with security that activates during unauthorized tampering, alerts Homeland Security, GPS pings, automatic video. The second Bethany cut that chain, she lit up federal databases across 3 states. Then came her fatal mistake. After the tow truck driver fled, Bethany locked the community gates, trapping my Jeep inside and blocking law enforcement access. If he wants his military truck back, he can follow proper HOA procedures, she screamed at Maya, waving the keys like a suburban warlord. Military service doesn't make him above the rules. Watching this unfold through a grainy phone feed, I felt rage course through me like fire. The smell of diesel and sweat in my deployment tent mixed with the sight of a suburban tyrant stealing federal property while my sister filmed her meltdown. Knowledge nugget: federal task force vehicles aren't just cars. They're classified equipment. Tampering triggers Homeland Security protocols, alerts multiple federal agencies, and elevates charges to terrorism enhancement potential. This wasn't HOA drama anymore. It was national security. And then came the turning point. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow across the street, who'd buried 2 military sons of her own, watched Bethany's meltdown from her window. She'd seen enough. She picked up the phone and rallied the neighborhood. Veterans, families, every silent victim of Bethany's reign of terror. By 10 a.m., my grandmother's house was surrounded. A human shield of neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder around the Jeep. "This ends right here, right now," declared Tom Henderson, a 72-year-old Vietnam vet whose son had done 3 tours in Afghanistan. "You want that boy's vehicle? You'll go through 30 veterans first." When Maya called me back, her voice carried a new strength. "Tank, you should see this. The whole neighborhood's here." Mr. Henderson brought his American flag. Mrs. Chen is making coffee. They're not leaving. But Bethany wasn't done. Faced with resistance, she cranked the dial to full suburban fascism. She filed emergency reports claiming veterans had formed an armed militia on the street. Called the fire department alleging explosive hazards in military equipment. She had just poured gasoline on the fire. Code enforcement started fabricating violations about unauthorized assemblies. Animal control even claimed emotional support dogs were attack animals. Every false report was another federal crime. Filing false statements about military personnel and federal property carries real penalties under multiple statutes. The breaking point came when federal marshals finally rolled into Willowbrook Estates, only to discover Bethany had changed the community gate locks, blocking agents from accessing their own stolen property. That's obstruction of federal justice. Marshal Jennifer Torres, a no-nonsense agent who'd taken down cartel bosses and domestic terrorists, took one look at the gate. Her expression shifted from professional courtesy to predator's focus. You've obstructed federal agents investigating theft of government property. Open this gate immediately or face additional charges." Bethany's response sealed her fate. "I don't recognize federal authority over private HOA property. You have no jurisdiction in my community." She had just declared war on the United States government. In her bathrobe. Game over. I landed stateside 72 hours later, desert sand still in my mouth, adrenaline still in my blood. Maya sat at Grandma's kitchen table, hands trembling, surrounded by enough evidence to topple a small government. But what hit me first wasn't Grandma's vanilla candles or fresh tortillas. It was the sour smell of desperation and fear that had soaked into the walls while I was gone. "Tank, you need to see this before the feds get here," Maya said, spreading documents across the table. "I found something that changes everything." Inside the manila folders, 5 years of HOA records, minutes, and correspondence she'd pulled through her teacher network. Buried deep was a contract between Kensington Urban Holdings and Eastbrook Development Corporation, dated 6 months before I inherited Grandma's house. The subject line, Willowbrook Estates Acquisition Strategy, Phase 2 Implementation. "They weren't just harassing military families randomly," Maya whispered. Teacher instincts had turned her into an accidental detective. They were systematically clearing properties for a massive development deal. The old paper crumbled in my hands as I read the details. Carl's company had pre-sold 47 Willowbrook properties for luxury condos, homes they didn't even own yet, including Grandma's. "Look at the target list," Maya said, pointing to an appendix that made my fists clench. Every military family, every elderly resident, every person who couldn't fight back. All marked for acquisition facilitation. The Hendersons, the Martinez family, Grandma Rosa, all targeted. Then came the revelation that changed everything. Bethany had been forging HOA violations. Maya showed me the original 1987 bylaws, the real ones, not Bethany's fakes. Military vehicles weren't just allowed, they were protected under federal compliance requirements. She created fake rules and counted on people being too scared or ignorant to check, Maya said, her voice gaining strength. But there's more. The financials showed systematic embezzlement. Over 3 years, $184,000 had been siphoned to Carl's development company through bogus contracts and phantom community improvement projects. Knowledge nugget. When HOA boards divert community funds to personal businesses without resident approval, it becomes federal mail fraud if any communications cross state lines. And when those crimes form a pattern, the RICO Act applies, organized crime territory with 20-year sentences. Maya's fear sweat mixed with determination as she revealed the final piece. "Tank, I think they killed her." She showed me violation notices sent to Grandma during her hospice weeks, citations for property maintenance, threats of legal action against a dying woman who couldn't leave her bed. The stress of fighting those fake violations spiked her blood pressure. The hospice nurse said she kept asking if we'd lose the house. Her voice echoed in my memory, "Mijo, don't let them take our home." I'd thought she was delirious. She was warning me. Maya wasn't the timid teacher anymore. She was a warrior armed with evidence and righteous fury. "Tank, this isn't about your Jeep anymore. This is organized crime disguised as community governance. They've been destroying families for profit." The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it exploded. Federal prosecutors were about to inherit a RICO case involving fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and elder abuse. But for me, this wasn't just about property anymore. It was about Grandma's memory, and every family they destroyed. The war room took shape in Grandma's living room within 48 hours. And the irony wasn't lost on me. We were planning the destruction of suburban tyranny in the same space where she once yelled at telenovela villains. Maya had become someone I barely recognized. The timid teacher was gone, replaced by a tactical mastermind orchestrating coordination between federal agents, veteran networks, and an army of furious neighbors. Grandma's familiar vanilla candles had been permanently replaced by the smell of burnt coffee, stress sweat, and stacks of legal documents. Captain Chen showed up with 2 federal prosecutors and enough legal firepower to bring down a small government. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez spread Maya's evidence across every surface, shaking her head in disbelief. "Rodriguez, I've prosecuted cartel money laundering operations with less documentation than this." That's when she explained something that made my task force training snap into focus. Back in federal crime school, we learned about RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. At the time, I thought it only applied to mobsters and cartels. But when suburban tyrants run systematic fraud and discrimination that crosses state lines, they become federal organized crime. Maya's evidence proved exactly that, a coordinated criminal enterprise involving embezzlement, fraud, and civil rights violations, tied together by Carl's city council seat and Bethany's HOA authority. Because Carl's development deals involved interstate commerce, the whole scheme fell under federal jurisdiction. The allies gathering in Grandma's living room looked like a resistance movement. Tom Henderson brought his Vietnam vet crew, 12 men who'd survived real wars and weren't afraid of suburban corruption. Mrs. Patterson provided surveillance photos, including shots of Bethany and Carl's secret midnight meetings at the community center. Maya's teacher union brought a surprise advantage: media expertise. Educators are experts at breaking down complex issues, and they'd been waiting for a cause to stand beside military families. The sound of Maya's steady, confident voice giving commands in the same room where Grandma once hummed Mexican lullabies hit me hard. My little sister, once bullied into silence, was now directing federal agents and community volunteers. For the first time, I felt something in my chest loosen. The financial warfare piece was deeply personal for Maya. She had stayed up countless nights combing through HOA ledgers. Her teacher's instinct for spotting cheating translated perfectly into catching patterns of fraud. For her, the embezzlement wasn't just theft, it was a betrayal of trust, the kind of moral crime our mother had raised us to despise. Tank, remember when Mom used to balance the household budget at this very table? Maya asked, pointing to spreadsheets from the forensic accountant. She taught us stealing from families is the lowest crime there is. Forensic accountant Jennifer Walsh explained Carl's racket, pre-selling homes to out-of-state developers before forcing out current owners. I remembered similar scams from my task force days, advanced fee fraud, just dressed up in suburban paperwork. Maya even uncovered emails between Carl and Eastbrook Development mapping out displacement timelines for homes they didn't even own yet. The violation wasn't abstract anymore. These people had planned to steal Grandma's house before she was even gone. Our DIY surveillance network mixed my military training with neighborhood grit. Hidden cameras, coordinated patrols, encrypted comms. Mrs. Patterson's bay window became command central. Henderson's garage turned into equipment storage. Maya's house became the communications hub. The recall election strategy came straight out of Maya's civics classroom. She'd always told her students democracy only works if citizens actually use it. Now she was proving it. Most people don't realize HOA boards can be recalled through petitions, usually requiring just 25 to 33% of homeowners. Maya's door-to-door campaign revealed just how deep Bethany's abuses ran. The Washingtons had proof of racial harassment. The Johnsons had documentation of veteran discrimination. The elderly Kowalskis had been cited for excessive medical equipment noise from their oxygen concentrator. Within 72 hours, Maya gathered 67% of Willowbrook signatures demanding the board's removal. The scent of victory mixed with the desert dust still clinging to my uniform. Maya's teacher network amplified the story. Military family harassment went viral in veteran forums, catching the attention of Congress. 3 representatives demanded federal briefings on systematic HOA discrimination. And then came the insurance fraud discovery. Maya found Bethany had filed bogus claims for property damage supposedly caused by my Jeep, damage that never existed. From my task force training, I knew insurance fraud was a prosecutor's favorite charge. It was easy to prove, hard to defend, and carried real prison time. Civil rights attorneys joined after reviewing the pattern of discrimination. Systematic targeting of military families violated federal fair housing laws. Targeting Grandma in her hospice weeks triggered elder abuse protections worth millions in damages. Maya was elected interim HOA president by acclamation at an emergency meeting. Her first act was freezing all HOA accounts pending federal investigation. Watching her wield the gavel in the same community center where Bethany had ruled with fear felt like justice served ice cold. But Bethany wasn't done. Her desperation turned criminal at exactly 3:17 a.m. Mia's infrared cameras caught her in our backyard, torching HOA financial records behind Grandma's tool shed. The acrid smell of burning paper and lighter fluid drifted through Maya's window, mixing with the lingering scent of fear that Bethany carried everywhere she went. She was hunched over metal trash can like some suburban witch, shoving papers into flames with trembling hands. "Tank, she's destroying evidence in our yard," Maya whispered into her phone, watching through her bedroom window as Bethany fumbled with matches in the dark. "She's actually burning financial records, while under federal investigation." My preparation had been silent but deliberate for weeks. Federal surveillance teams were already tracking every desperate move, documenting each crime as it happened. Still, watching this spoiled suburban tyrant destroy her own corruption with fire, that was pure poetry. But Bethany's sabotage escalated from property damage into outright personal warfare, and my task force instincts kicked into overdrive. The next morning, Maya found her car vandalized. All 4 tires slashed. Military scum spray-painted across the windshield in dripping red letters. The crunch of broken glass beneath her shoes as she walked around the wreckage froze something cold inside my chest. The texture of helpless rage was familiar from deployment, enemies targeting those you couldn't always shield. Except this wasn't a war zone overseas. This was domestic terrorism in suburbia, aimed at my family. My counterstrike was precise and satisfying. One call to Captain Chen, and within hours, federal protective details were assigned to Maya and every cooperating witness. Not obvious bodyguards, but agents blending in, morning joggers, coffee drinkers, casual neighbors. Now Bethany's surveillance was itself under surveillance, monitored by professionals with security clearances and arrest powers. The community's response was beautiful. Tom Henderson rallied veteran patrols, making Bethany's midnight prowls impossible. The echo of combat boots at 2 a.m. replaced the old soundtrack of neighborhood silence. Mrs. Patterson's kitchen became command central, fueled by cookies and righteous fury. Then Carl's corruption surfaced in ways even we hadn't imagined. Maya uncovered city council recordings where Carl pressured the police chief to ignore military family complaints. His smug voice filled her laptop. "These military people bring instability. Their vehicles, their schedules, their problems affect property values and community character." That single recording became Exhibit A in a federal civil rights conspiracy case. He wasn't just enabling Bethany, he was weaponizing government authority to discriminate. Bethany's own arrogance handed prosecutors more ammunition. Federal wire surveillance caught her trying to bribe Maya in a grocery store parking lot. $50,000 in a plain envelope. "Military families deserve better neighborhoods anyway," she stammered, shoving it toward Maya. "Take this money. Find somewhere more suitable." Maya, ever the teacher, kept her phone recording while agents watched from unmarked vans. Witness bribery carries a mandatory minimum of 5 years. Bethany had just written her own indictment. But she didn't stop there. Using embezzled HOA funds, she paid a private investigator to attempt bribing federal agents themselves. The level of stupidity was almost refreshing. She thought federal lawmen could be bought like her local cronies. Federal agents don't take bribes, they document them, record them, and tack on another felony to the case file. Meanwhile, Carl's political empire collapsed. The mayor distanced himself. City council members demanded Carl's resignation. His development company's stock tanked as corruption allegations hit the press. The cologne couldn't mask his panic during emergency council meetings. He tried spinning it all as an outside military agitation, but every abuse of power was being logged by agents who'd made careers dismantling corrupt officials. Maya, meanwhile, started receiving threats. Anonymous notes tucked under her windshield. Distorted voicemails hissing that accidents happen to teachers who step out of line. Hearing her voice crack while replaying those threats lit something primal in me, but my reaction was pure federal precision. Witness intimidation triggers FBI terrorism task forces. Every threat was traced, cross-referenced, and catalogued with forensic precision. Bethany's desperation only grew. She filed false police reports, claiming Maya was unstable and plotting violence. She told police that military militias were forming in Willowbrook. Filing fabricated reports against federal witnesses isn't local mischief, it's obstruction of justice with terrorism enhancements. The brilliance of federal patience was letting Bethany self-destruct, one crime at a time, while methodical agents built an airtight case. Her last desperate gambit was a full-scale smear campaign that revealed the breadth of her suburban crime ring. The attack began at Maya's school. Anonymous complaints poured into the district office. accusations that she was radicalizing children with anti-government, pro-military propaganda, and creating an unsafe environment for civilians. The sound of Maya's trembling voice over the phone made my fists tighten. "Tank, they're trying to end my career," she whispered from her empty classroom. The familiar smell of chalk dust and children's laughter now carried the stench of fear. "Parents are demanding I be fired." The principal called me in for an emergency meeting about my ties to unstable military elements. That's when I learned Bethany had unleashed Morrison and Associates, the same PR firm politicians use when they need their corruption scrubbed clean. They were painting Maya as a dangerous veteran with PTSD, a walking threat contaminating peaceful suburban communities. The lies had a different texture than enemy propaganda overseas. This wasn't about geopolitics. This was personal warfare, crafted to destroy families instead of missions. But Bethany had underestimated Maya. Months of threats had sharpened her instincts. My sister had documented every slander, every anonymous complaint, every attempt to smear our name. Her meticulous files made even my federal training look sloppy. And then the real truth emerged. Bethany wasn't acting alone. She had coordinated with HOA boards across 3 states, building model policies to target and manage so-called military family disruptions. This wasn't petty harassment anymore. This was systematic discrimination on a national scale. From my civil rights training, I knew what that meant. Conspiracy across state lines triggers RICO prosecutions. Coordinated attacks on constitutional rights are organized crime, pure and simple. Maya's counterstrike was beautiful. Her students and their parents organized a rally in the school parking lot. The lot overflowed with American flags and homemade signs. "We support Teacher Maya. Military families protect our freedom." The chants of 3rd graders shouting, "Thank you, Mr. Tank's sister," carried across the playground where Maya had poured her heart into teaching. Those children understood justice more clearly than half the adults in Willowbrook. Bethany's desperation spiraled into criminal insanity. She hired private investigators to stalk Maya's every move, following her to school, photographing her grocery runs, snapping pictures of her morning jogs. Camera shutters clicked outside classroom windows. And then Maya found them, listening devices hidden in her car. 3 separate bugs, all traceable to Morrison and Associates through federal purchase records. Federal law is crystal clear. Unauthorized surveillance triggers the Wiretap Act, 20-year sentences when it's tied to witness intimidation. And planting devices in a teacher's car? That crossed into Homeland Security territory, triggering terrorism enhancements. Captain Chen moved fast. The FBI's counterintelligence division took over Maya's case, treating it as potential domestic terrorism. Overnight, Bethany's suburban smear campaign was elevated to the same level as international espionage. The story blew up nationally. Military advocacy networks blasted it across social media. Congressional offices demanded hearings. Fox News called. CNN lined up interviews. Military Times ran Maya's story on the front page under the headline "Suburban Warfare Against Service Families." Carl's career collapsed live on television. During a city council meeting, federal agents executed warrants as cameras rolled, hauling out box after box of evidence while Carl sat frozen in his seat. The humiliation on his face was broadcast coast to coast. And then Morrison and Associates made the fatal mistake. They published a community safety report claiming military families caused higher crime rates, domestic violence, and substance abuse. It was fabricated propaganda dressed up as data, engineered to turn suburban neighborhoods against veterans. Maya's teacher instincts flared into righteous fury. "Tank, this isn't just about us anymore. They just smeared every military family in America." She was right. Publishing false data to incite discrimination against veterans isn't just slander. It's a hate crime. And when it's done across multiple states for profit, it's racketeering with civil rights conspiracy enhancements. The investigation exploded. 17 states opened federal cases as more military families came forward, telling eerily similar stories. Fake violations, HOA harassment, coordinated pressure campaigns to drive them out. Maya's careful documentation became the playbook federal prosecutors used to build nationwide RICO cases. Her inbox flooded with emails from military spouses thanking her, sharing their own battles, and finally feeling seen. My sister was no longer just a target. She was a national advocate. Her voice, once shaken, now rang with authority as she coordinated with federal attorneys in rooms where Grandma once told us bedtime stories about standing up to bullies. They thought they were fighting one teacher and one soldier, Maya said, surrounded by case files thicker than law books. But they actually declared war on every American family that serves this country. And the reckoning was about to be spectacular. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center overflowed with fury and federal muscle. The air smelled of stale coffee and justice on the verge of eruption. Families packed shoulder to shoulder, news cameras from 6 stations rolling, federal agents lining the walls. Military families from 3 states had driven hours to witness what came next. Because Bethany's empire of lies was about to crumble under the weight of federal law. Congressional representatives filled the front row, scribbling notes for upcoming hearings on military family discrimination. Bethany arrived fashionably late in her white Lexus, greeted not with admiration but with a wall of protesters carrying signs, "Military Families Matter and Prosecute HOA Terrorists." The sound of her designer heels striking asphalt was drowned out by veterans chanting, "Thank you for your service." Words meant for Maya, not her. Bethany entered like a fallen dictator clinging to her last illusion of power, Carl trailing behind with the posture of a man already staring into a prison cell. The air in the community center pulsed with electricity as Maya stepped to the podium. Gone was the frightened teacher cornered by suburban tyrants. Before them stood a national advocate, her voice strengthened by federal backing and congressional attention. For 5 years these people used their positions to wage war against military families, she declared, her words echoing across live streams nationwide. They fabricated rules, embezzled funds, and orchestrated campaigns of discrimination that betrayed everything this country stands for. Thunderous applause rattled the windows as her words ignited the crowd. Federal prosecutor Rebecca Martinez followed, rolling in evidence boxes stacked like monuments to corruption. Her voice carried the authority that made criminals finally realize their games were over. The United States government has compiled overwhelming evidence of criminal conspiracy, theft of federal property, civil rights violations, witness intimidation, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Each charge hit like a hammer blow. Then Tom Henderson, speaking for the veteran community, took the mic. His voice shook with emotion. "My son served 3 tours to defend this country. These people thought they could spit on that sacrifice for their profit. Today, they learn they were wrong. But the moment that ended suburban tyranny belonged to me." I rose to the podium, hearing Grandma's voice whisper in memory, "Stand up to bullies, mijo, but do it the right way." Bethany Kensington Wright thought she was cutting locks on some soldier's personal vehicle, I said, my voice slicing through silence. What she actually did was interfere with an active federal drug operation, compromise classified surveillance equipment, and steal property belonging to the United States government. The collective gasp felt like the air had been ripped from the building. I continued. That Jeep contained $347,000 worth of surveillance gear and evidence tied to cartel investigations spanning 4 states. When she cut those locks, she didn't just steal, she compromised national security. Bethany's face drained to the color of old concrete. Her suburban war games had escalated into federal treason. But her greatest crime wasn't stealing my vehicle, I pressed on, voice hardening. It was waging systematic warfare against military families, corrupting government processes, and believing suburban entitlement stood above federal law. The crowd exploded into a standing ovation, chants of "Lock her up," and "Justice for our heroes," shaking the hall. Federal Marshal Jennifer Torres stepped forward with quiet, practiced authority. She placed handcuffs on Bethany as cameras flashed, her words reverberating across every network. "Bethany Kensington Wright, you're under arrest for theft of federal law enforcement property, conspiracy to violate civil rights, embezzlement, witness intimidation, and obstruction of federal justice." The metallic click of those cuffs was justice incarnate. Bethany's face collapsed from defiance to stunned ruin. Carl tried slipping out the back but walked straight into waiting federal agents. His arrest was less dramatic, but just as final. For the first time, the nation saw suburban corruption meet federal law with mathematical precision. These aren't just vehicles, prosecutors reminded reporters. They are classified federal assets. Interfering with them carries mandatory minimums. Live on national television, Maya's voice cemented history. This proves that organized harassment of military families is a federal crime. No HOA board, no matter how corrupt, stands above the Constitution of the United States. The taste of victory was sweeter than anything from Grandma's kitchen, infused with the satisfaction of bullies finally facing federal justice. 18 months later, I stood in that same kitchen reading the sentencing report, Grandma's voice echoing in my head, "Justice served the right way, mijo." Bethany, 8 years in federal prison, no parole, plus $647,000 restitution. The judge's words became legend. Your systematic harassment of military families represents domestic terrorism disguised as community governance. This court will not tolerate suburban tyranny. Carl, 6 years, a lifetime ban from public office, and $3.2 million in settlements that repaid every family they'd harmed. Their empire crumbled. But the greatest victory came afterward. Maya, now HOA president, rewrote governance itself, unveiling the Willowbrook Military Family Bill of Rights, bylaws that became a national model. The smell of fresh hope replaced the rot of corruption. The neighborhood was no longer a place of fear, but a fortress of community, rebuilt by justice, defended by truth. Federal protections were now written directly into community law. Where Beth's house once stood, seized through federal asset forfeiture, the Veteran Memorial Park now thrives, reborn by community vote. Children swing and laugh where suburban tyranny once lived, their joy echoing across grass that grows freely, untouched by ruler measurements. The Rodriguez Foundation for Military Family Rights became Maya's true calling. She left teaching to help families nationwide fight HOA discrimination, using our case as the blueprint for federal civil rights prosecution. Her documentation system is now taught at FBI academies. Grandma's old house evolved into mission control for military family advocacy. The same kitchen where she once taught us to stand up to bullies now hosts strategy sessions with congressional staffers, constitutional lawyers, and families waging their own suburban battles. The impact surpassed every dream. Congress passed legislation requiring HOA financial transparency and protecting military families from systemic harassment. The Tank Rodriguez Act established federal oversight of community governance, adding criminal penalties for discrimination against service members. What most families never knew became our gift to the nation. Military personnel hold constitutional protections that override local ordinances. HOAs can be recalled by resident petitions with only 25% of signatures. Systematic harassment is now prosecuted as organized crime, punishable by decades in prison. The results were undeniable. The National HOA Corruption Database documented over 400 similar cases after our story went viral, sparking federal investigations that shielded thousands of military families from suburban terrorism. Property values in Willowbrook rose by 31% after corruption was eliminated, proving that justice is profitable and ethical governance attracts stronger communities. Military families began seeking us out specifically, knowing they'd be protected and celebrated here. Maya's transformation into a national advocate brought joy none of us expected. She married David Chen, a Navy veteran and brother of Captain Sarah Chen, who moved to Willowbrook after our story showed that military families could win against corruption. Their wedding reception filled the same community center where federal justice had once been delivered live. I found happiness too, with Elena Martinez, the federal prosecutor who built our case. After transferring to local operations, she and I bought the house next to Grandma's. Waking up each morning in the neighborhood we fought for feels like victory served daily. The Rodriguez Military Scholarship Fund, created from lawsuit settlements, has already sent 23 military children to college. Each graduation reminds us that one family's courage can transform entire communities and create opportunities for the next generation. At 91, Mrs. Patterson remains the conscience of Willowbrook. She cuts the ribbon at every community event. "Your grandmother knew you'd do something special," she tells me, eyes sparkling with pride. "She just didn't know you'd save the whole neighborhood." The moment that made everything worthwhile came during our first annual Freedom Day celebration. Hundreds of military families gathered in the park where Beth's tyranny once stood, sharing stories of victory over suburban corruption. Children's laughter mingled with veterans' pride. The smell of barbecue and freedom filled the air once poisoned by fear. Maya's hand rested in mine as we watched families thrive in the community Grandma loved. But my favorite moment still comes every morning, when I see Old Glory flying proudly over houses where military families live free from harassment. That is the taste of true victory: justice served, community healed, and proof that bullies can be defeated when good people organize and fight back. Share your own HOA nightmare in the comments. The Rodriguez Foundation offers free legal aid to military families facing suburban discrimination. Subscribe for more stories of defeating corruption with courage, and hit the notification bell if you believe every veteran deserves a safe home. From all of us at HOA Stories, thank you for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.